Poštovani gledatelji, drago mi je što je s nama u programu N1 televizije jedan od ljudi koji u dušu poznaje situaciju i u Ukrajini i u Rusiji i samog Vladimira Putina. To je bivši estonski predsjednik Toomas Hendrik Ilves. President Ilves, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you. You were, how to say, saying for years that, you know, I have to quote you, that West cannot come together and sing Kumbaya with Vladimir Putin. How do you assess this moment of history, knowing how much did you talk about it, how much did you wrote about it and worked on this politically?
Well, I think we have now entered a new era, which February 24th, for good, killed the post-Cold War era. It began somewhere between 1989 and 1991, between the sort of Polish victory of Solidarność and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and has lasted until 11 days ago. What this will look like, I don't know, but there have been countless sort of warning signs over the years. They go back to the 90s when Russia treated sort of the East European countries very differently from the West European countries, being fairly brutish and arrogant towards the East European and Central European countries, while being sycophantic and smarmy to West European countries, with the result that the West European countries did not take what we were saying seriously. Now, we have massive cyber attacks, the first ever really on a nation state in 2007, and we were dismissed as not knowing what we were talking about by countries that couldn't distinguish a computer from a toaster. 2008, we saw immediately after the Russian attack on Georgia, the EU give up and restore all ties. We saw Obama start with his reset policy, which didn't go anywhere. We saw limited sanctions after the 2014 annexation of Crimea, which was the first genuine case of violation of the principle, the post-World War II system of world order, that you do not change borders through invasions. Now, I mean, we've seen through this steady escalation in the past 2-3 months, a consistent refusal on the part of Western countries to really take the threat seriously. You know, last year we saw the president of Germany saying, well, we owe it to Russia to build Nord Stream 2 because of what we did in World War II, when in fact more Poles, Belarusians, and Ukrainians in each country were killed in absolute numbers, not to mention proportions, than the Nazis did to Russia. So this preference and this sort of sticking one's head in the sand has been long-term.
But coming to this point, now, what can be done? We are hearing President Zelensky each day calling NATO to protect Ukraine's airspace. The West is still saying it will be an open war with Russia and possibility of Putin to use nuclear weapons. What can be done at this point?
Well, I'm hoping that we will see such a dramatic change as we saw in Germany within 4 days of the beginning of the invasion, which was quite unexpected. So many things can change very quickly. Believing the threat of nuclear war is perhaps taking Vladimir Putin too seriously. So I'm hoping that some form of no-fly zone is instituted, though at this point we don't see it. Well, I mean, you can with massive transfers of anti-aircraft missiles, perhaps we can accomplish the same result. That seems to be okay. Clearly, the sanctions must be continued, but this will again, for them really to have an effect, we have to pay a price as well, which is that we have to basically boycott Russian oil and gas, and that will make life expensive for us. I think that's a price that if we really wish to win against this war, we will have to undertake those steps.
And that is decision that, West is still, or Europe is still reluctant to do. We heard today, that Gazprom announced that gas is flowing towards Europe undisruptedly. So do you think that sanctions on oil and gas could be that thing that can stop Putin or not?
Well, it's their only source of revenue right now. The sole source of Russian revenue is fossil fuel extraction. That's it, nothing else. Everything else has been shut off, but that is the biggest source of revenue. And so and it's important to note that as the exchange rate for the ruble gets worse and worse, Russia actually makes more and more money from the West buying oil and gas or dollars.
I want to talk to you about something which is, I think, really important in this moment. And you, as a pioneer in politics who did something to Estonia, which we all know your country on, is digitalization and understanding of new economics, new world through digital sphere. We live in an unprecedented times in terms of hybrid warfare that we saw leading to this and going on at the moment. We see at the moment this, Putin Jugend videos being broadcast through social media. We hear the paroles of Nazism. We see this Z. We read the polling article of my colleague Valerie Hopkins in New York Times, that Russians' relatives don't believe their relatives in Ukraine, there's been an invasion and war. How can we tackle this? We saw that Europe banned Russia Today and Sputnik, but they were there for years and years and years and years and years until this moment. So in what state of mind is Russia, are Russians, and what can we do about it concerning this hybrid element?
Well, it's increasingly fascistic, I would say. I mean, this is something we just have to say. I mean, those same videos of sort of highly reminiscent of black-shirted Hitler Jugend with their half swastika, the Z, which is just half a swastika, and that's quite clear. That's what they're trying to turn this letter, which is not in the Russian alphabet, in the Cyrillic alphabet, into a symbol of great Russian nationalism. I think it's too early to say. I mean, it is day 11 of this genocidal war. And the real thing that we have to focus on is accountability and the fact that all of these people will be hauled before The Hague, or they will never leave Russia, and they can take all the vacations they want in Sochi, but or maybe in Belgrade, from what I understand, but they won't go anywhere else.
Talking about the role of oligarchs, we saw some very, very vague messages, and unfortunately, because of almost this martial law imposed on criticism towards the war and 15 years of jail, we saw, several tens of people going out in several cities and being arrested immediately. Is there any hope for Russia itself within itself?
Well, there's always hope. These are very dark days, and so I don't see anything coming yet or coming now. And it seems that the kind of measures they've impacted will only increase the number of capable thinking Russians to flee Russia. I mean, there's a massive outflow of brains right now. And we'll end up with people of the same intellectual level as Putin.
And talking about that and the structure of the world and international security order, we saw what happened in Syria. We saw the Russia's role in Syria. We saw the disregard of international law by Assad. And Russia is still a permanent member of UN Security Council with the veto power. So what can be done in terms of, international world order and Russia's place in it?
Well, I predict. I mean, I don't know what will happen, but certainly I think what we are seeing is a long overdue consolidation of liberal democracies, not just in Europe and the United States, but also across the world, of those countries that believe in the fundamental values of free and fair elections, rule of law, respect for human rights, and on the other side, countries that do not. And I think that the countries that do not will face gradual impoverishment as these fundamental aspects become more and more important. Because let's face it, for many, many years, I mean, countries like Germany, I mean, they're perfectly happy to build Volkswagens as Uyghurs were being sent to concentration camps, and perfectly happy to ignore the massive violations of human rights by Moscow in order to get gas. This will become much more difficult, and they've just overplayed their hand once again.
Talking about Europe and our future, our security, and Ukraine, of course, in the middle of all of this, do you see this being a long, dragging conflict concerning the amount of atrocities and things we see in Ukraine on the 11th day of the war?
It's very hard to say. It really is hard to say. I'm not a military analyst, but looking at the losses that Russia has taken, and also with sort of having to use older and older equipment, not only on the human scale of people blatant disregard for the lives of their own troops, but also that they are so poorly equipped, and the massive corruption that has led, as we've seen, to sort of tires that don't hold up their armored personnel carriers. It's very hard to say. I mean, they could keep doing this. I think there is this, someday they'll learn their lesson. I mean, if you look historically, you had 1905, this big, like, oh, we're big, we're going to go and invade, we're going to beat the Japanese. Well, it didn't work. They did it with the Poles in 1920. With where a small number of Poles turned back a massive Russian army. They did it in the Winter War against Finland. They stayed longer in Afghanistan, but they left there too as losers. Each time they've lost, because they do not understand that people will fight to defend their country, and whereas if you're the invader and you're just sending cannon fodder in, they're not going to fight that way. And you can commit a lot of atrocities, yes, but you're not going to win. And so how long it will take for Ukraine to win, I don't know. I fear with each passing day, there will be just so much more mass death and mass destruction. But they will not subjugate the Ukrainian people. I mean, this is not going to work. So How long it will take, I don't know, but they will lose.
Talking about losing, how do you see the role of China in all of this?
Well, I think China seems to be, hasn't really made up its mind because because of their anti-Western stance, they've aligned themselves with Putin. On the other hand, how sustainable this is, I don't know. I mean, Chinese banks will not risk doing business with Russian banks that have been sanctioned, because that would mean any foreign bank that does business with a sanctioned bank becomes automatically sanctioned itself. And they do so much more business with Europe and the United States than they do with Russia. So ideology will come up against business sense. So I don't know where China will fall on this, but it certainly makes them uncomfortable.
And for the end, knowing the history of Baltic states, of Estonia, and knowing how big and important strategic goal for you was to be an EU and NATO member, we hear now some signals from your neighboring Finland. How do you think that our security and foreign policy architecture will change? And we see it changing during these times. We saw what Denmark decided yesterday and things like that.
Well, for all these years, the Finnish politicians have said, well, we would maybe like to join, but the population doesn't. Well, now we have seen a number of polls that show a majority of Finns and most recently also a majority of Swedes want to join NATO. This will make life difficult for the politicians, I think, who now will have to rethink their reasons for not joining NATO. But on the other hand, we see that these countries are not, or the political leaderships in these countries are not rushing to join. But this seems to be a case where the people are ahead of the politicians.
Before this war, there was a talk in Europe about, our own army, our own change of our security architecture. Could this kind of scenario be possible?
I think there will be a massive rethink on the part of both the European Union and NATO on security and defense. Europe has been dithering for years about this. We have something very vague called PESCO. We're supposed to come up by April, May with a, quote, strategic compass. I would suggest they throw all the work done on this so-called strategic compass out the window right now and start all over to deal with the new reality that we face.
And for the end, do you see other possible destabilizations? We saw in our neighborhood, what happened the other day. We had pro-Russian, pro-Putin demonstrations in Serbia. Well the situation in Balkans. Do you think there can be more destabilization of Russia?
Well, they even tried a coup d'etat in Montenegro. So I think the only thing that will really prevent more, that will at least make minimal the attempts at destabilization, is the fact that they have so many people, especially in the GRU, the main actor in these cases, too busy with Ukraine to actually come here. But those efforts continue, and I think we will continue to see them for a long time to come, as long as the current regime is in place in Moscow.
President Ilves, thank you so much for this talk. I'm also saying to our viewers, you're very active also on social media, on Twitter, so to follow you and to see your insights and read it in foreign press. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.